And I see the question coming up. Yes, we are recording this. And that way, should you, in fact, I can see from the little red dot up at the top right of my screen, this is currently recorded. And so what I'm going to do is get started right now. So again, if you need to access this at a later date, you're more than welcome to. So welcome, everybody. My name is Jared Heiner. I am not only the Director of Education here at Aspire Technology Partners, but I'm also a client advocate as well, an account manager, and a little bit about Aspire. We pride ourselves on being a systems integrator. We have an amazing team, which not only is made up of engineers and salespeople, but also we've got an amazing customer success team. We also have managed services. We do a lot of different things inside the technology field, and bluntly, we're able to provide a depth of service that has made us the award-winning technology partner that we are. And so we can talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. But as you can see, we cover everything from enterprise networking, wow, look at that, to collaboration, cybersecurity. We also are experts at enlarging a screen to help you see as you go through, data center and cloud, mobility, and IoT. And so all of those things, like I said, we have a panel of experts. We really have an amazing engineering team that sits behind all of us to make sure that really whatever your objectives are being met. And so having said that, what I'd like to do, you can see all of our accomplishments there at the bottom. We're very proud to work with a number of partners, but primarily Cisco. And again, we can certainly guide you through some of those technical questions that you might have. But if we could advance the slide, it's not just about Aspire today. As we start talking about E-Rate, we want to better understand the program itself. E-Rate is not just about being able to consume money from a different source. It's helping us build the infrastructures and move forward with the plans that we have for our particular organizations. Whatever our objectives are, how do we meet those, and how is E-Rate a part of that? So there are timelines to E-Rate that are extremely important. What are those timelines? What can be provided to districts? One of the biggest questions, it's ever changing, and I think our expert panel is going to be able to help answer this question. What's changing? What can we use our money for? What's coming down the pipe to help us make decisions? And it's not just us telling you word for word what's out there in the documentation. It's being able to give you examples and help guide you to make the right decision. Obviously, it's not just E-Rate. E-Rate's a part of a much bigger puzzle for your organization. And so we want to be able to look at what other grants and funding are available. So once we start looking at that particular picture, I think we've established a really good group. If you could advance to the next slide, I'd like to make some introductions. And every time I look at the pictures up here, I remind myself I have to get another headshot, or at least find someone else who can take my place. Because when I'm standing next to Jeff Sweeney and Vince Saragusa, it reminds me that I have a face for radio. I think they say a face for radio. So I'm really excited to be able to introduce Jeff Sweeney. He is the Chief Legal Officer for E-Rate Consulting. Having been an IT director, having been
Thanks, Jared.
on
I
the
appreciate
Cisco
that
side.
very much.
My pleasure. E-Rate Consulting has been a large part of our decision-making process, especially when I was at a local school district. Again, it's very complicated, and being able to have the right resources really helped us carve a path to saying, what can we utilize funding-wise, how and when, and how do we meet those timelines? And then Vince Smolder Saragusa in the middle here, he is our grant strategy rep from Cisco. Vince has been doing this for a long time. He's got a tremendous amount of expertise, not just for E-Rate, but grants as well. And so when we put Jeff and Vince together with the powerhouse of engineers that we have at Aspire, we really are looking at a timeline and a purpose behind how we're building infrastructures and how we can fund those. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation. And the goal of today is to help you get a better understanding of E-Rate Consulting, help you get a better understanding of Cisco, and what these gentlemen can bring to the table with their respective teams. If you could advance to the next slide. I know that we only have 30 minutes for this. The post-pandemic world, I guess we're still in it, leads us to understand that we cannot spend a tremendous amount of time in webinars. We want to be able to introduce you to the experts, and that's what we're going to do. So, point of clarification, and then I will step aside and let Jeff take over. What do we mean with category 2? That's the equipment and services are those that are necessary to distribute Wi-Fi internet connectivity, to devices within school buildings. That's really important because when we start looking at the funding for E-Rate, category 2 pops up. It also includes managed network services and time and materials, such as maintenance contracts. And again, there's some really specific verbiage and how you approach these things. And so I am going to step back. Jeff, I'm going to let you take over and share your insight and tell us a little bit about what you folks do.
Happy to do that. Thanks, Jared. Thank you again. So, specifically, uh, as Jared, category two is there's two categories of service within E-rate: one internet and your wide area network connectivity. And category two is specifically for the services that are necessary to distribute Wi-Fi connectivity throughout your school buildings. And the easiest way to think about what is eligible is it is basically the foundational elements required to distribute wireless internet connectivity to your pupils. Okay, and they've also swept the managed network services into the category two categorization, as well as the time and materials maintenance contracts, because the some of those contracts do actually involve the maintenance of category two eligible equipment. So therefore, those types of contracts are eligible. However, if you have a time and materials contract that is also for your voice over IP
Jeff,
system or something like that, these services are not eligible. So, yes.
can you do me a quick favor? Here's what I need you to do. It seems that your audio is a little choppy, and what you're saying is extremely important. So if you could do me a favor, do you have the ability to call in via audio?
I can do you one better. Give me 10 seconds and I'm just going to switch rooms.
That works. Why don't we do this? Vince, can I have you jump in while Jeff makes the change and talk a little bit about your role? We're just going to do a quick flip flop here to maximize time, which means we'll have to advance some slides. But I've done this with Vince before. He is amazing on the fly.
I appreciate it, Jared. Yeah, works well here. So, Kathy, if you can get to my first slide, I'll appreciate it. And kick off with a good morning. Hello. Again, this is Vince Saragusa. I sit on the Cisco public funding team. And at a high level, we work to monitor the funding landscape. And we're invited to be an extended resource, a resource around questions dealing with funding, dealing with research, dealing with eligibility, and certainly broad efforts focused on formula and competitive-based grants. And on the slide here, Jeff will circle back with, just covering the ins and outs of E-rate, which is a very well-structured program. Certainly not without nuance and complexity, but relatively linear and clear in its support of a network and wireless connectivity that's really vital to just about any group nowadays, but certainly in the education system where accessing digital tools and resources has really become essential to staying current in the world and certainly the modern economy in general. So I encourage everybody to continue tackling E-rate, kind of as the network foundation that drives all these applications in the classroom, outside the classroom, wherever it might be, and then to leverage other alternative funding sources as a way to help stakeholders really consume all the benefits that are potentially available. So kind of circling around this wheel of funding, when we look at grants, needless to say, we're dealing with a really complex scenario and environment right now, obviously made worse by the pandemic and safety needs, transportation needs, remediation needs, mental health needs, certainly the list goes on. Also dealing with a fairly complex grant funding landscape where new programs are presenting themselves, oftentimes for the first time, perhaps too often with the expectation from the grant maker that's kind of open-ended and relatively vague. But fortunately, we're continuing to see alternative funding streams in general dedicated to supporting any number of programmatic needs. Oftentimes built on the same network that E-rate has and will continue to support, whether that's physical security with door access control, working with video surveillance cameras, working with something like WebEx around situational awareness and emergency notification, or a program like the Department of Agriculture's U.S. Department of Agriculture's distance learning and telemedicine program, which basically looks at video to deliver content, be it sharing an AP teacher, doing mock job interviews, or mental health encounters, whatever it might be. So certainly not an all-inclusive list here, and this is really where we'd like to sit down with Spire and our customers to get a feel for the direction you're heading, and then either reinforce or enlighten around what we're seeing in real time with funding sources and what's basically in the hopper moving forward. COVID-related stimulus funding for at least K-12s principally focused on ESSER, And many of you are familiar with the 3 rounds now of stimulus funding, ESSER being, principally the big dedicated funding for K through 12. And the next slide just kind of breaks down, where we've been over the 3 basically investments over the last year and a half. So, ESSER, next slide, Kathy, please. ESSER right now, what we're dealing with, a lot of spend by deadlines. And I'm sure if you're not familiar with ESSER, then the process, I encourage everybody to kind of get a feel for what your allocation looks like, what's been earmarked, what's left, and to the extent practical, at least for this third leg, they're really heavily relying on what they're calling meaningful consideration. So it's an opportunity for IT, for civic organizations, for nonprofits, for really any stakeholder that has a voice for the school district to consider and plan for, basically the notion of anything feeding continuity of education. And the next slide, validates at least, or, draws some attention to what some other schools have done in the past. We won't go over this list. This is something published, about a month ago that I thought was insightful, just in terms of what peers have done in other states. Something conspicuously missing from this list, and the next slide will reinforce that, is that the need for network security. And Jeff will kind of circle back from the E-rate flavor, but want to reinforce with your ESSER allocation, we've never really had a dedicated security posture program before. This is the closest we've seen. I think, it's promising to see some of the funding in the hopper. I think it's going to tie into it at the K through 12 level and certainly government level as well. But going back to ESSER, overtly, this is a funding stream that can be dedicated to addressing the rising tide of ransomware and cyber attacks and critical infrastructure vulnerabilities, reinforced both in the Department of Ed's frequently asked questions, and then on top of that, a senator letter coming out, just a few months ago that also reinforces that. So if security is a need and maybe it helps the premiums for insurance or, any of those type of scenarios, but won't call it low hanging necessarily. It's not dedicated to cybersecurity, but very much an eligible expense of your ESSER money, which comes to billions nationwide over the last few months and should be available at least through September 2023. And the next slide here, if we can move ahead, Kathy, just quickly hitting on the now passed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. A lot of this is going to be public utility, government, state government, local government related, but there are at least a couple components that are promising for K through 12. First being broadband, just tackling the digital divide in general. A lot more broadband money, equitable access to really what's out there in terms of resources. And then couple that with dedicated money for network security, I should say, excuse me. So the next slide here, we'll see money coming to state and local government. This is not earmarked for K through 12, but the clear expectation now through this brand new upcoming $1 billion state, local, tribal, and territorial program is that government sit down with education, whether that's K through 12 or higher ed. I haven't seen many mandates, and this is still a work in progress around sharing that money, but the requirement is that folks sit down as stakeholders and have a strong plan for how that security posture gets invested in and addressed. I think that's an indication over time that money will be shared or dedicated programs for K through 12 and to some extent likely higher ed. We're not there yet, very early in the process, but $1 billion to address, again, cybersecurity posture is really promising. We'll see another $250 million for county-owned utilities, and then back to the digital divide piece, a lot of money for broadband expansion, certainly, and $500 million for a new program, and this is one that's dedicated to K through 12s, waiting on the details to be released, but for grants for energy efficient improvements and renewable energy improvements at school facilities. So that might be the school facility itself, it might be transportation, might be looking at buses, but wanted to call this out as kind of hot off the press, brand new. We don't have a lot of details, but on top of, again, working with local government and this new, certainly all the broadband money, but this new energy efficiency program, things are promising. So I'll end by saying, consider me and my team an eager resource, through Jared or anybody in the Aspire team. If you want to talk about what's out there, what we're seeing, again, whether to reinforce what's already kind of, on your radar or to research and maybe come up with a few new nuggets or opportunities of funding. We'd love to sit down, hear a bit more about the direction the ecosystem is heading and feed some funding ideas to help that cause. So I'll pause there and eager to hear Jeff's analysis on E-rate and let me know if any questions pop up. So I appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, Vince, I appreciate that. And I think one of the things that I'd like to draw attention to is we see so much money left on the table, and having a conversation with whether it's myself or Roberto or any of the account managers here at Aspire and Vince, it doesn't cost anything. And a lot of times folks say, my God, this is overwhelming. Again, that's where having a conversation with Vince and saying, hey, this is the organization we are. Maybe it's K-12, maybe it's higher ed, maybe it's just a municipality or a public entity. And you say to yourself, I just want to know what's available. A lot of money gets left on the table. Right now we're all scratching to make sure we can get every penny. So, really, really valuable conversation. And Vince is just a tremendous resource whose job is to make sure you know what you can get. So thank you, Vince. And Jeff, thank you
Yes, sir.
for switching rooms. I apologize. But
I'm sorry.
I'll have you pick. No worries. Let's just pick up where you left off, and let's focus now directly on E-rate.
Okay, great. And again, I apologize to everybody for that. My internet has been acting unpredictably for the last couple of weeks. So yeah, just to continue. And again, we're going to be operating under the assumption that most of you have at least a superficial familiarity with the E-rate program in the interest of time. So I'm going to just briefly talk about eligible equipment, timelines, things along those lines, and then also changes that were implemented to the Category 2 rules last year. So Kathleen, if we could continue to the next slide. So some examples of eligible equipment, you have your wireless access points and controllers, right? Distribute Wi-Fi throughout the district. Network switches are obviously necessary in order to distribute your data. Firewalls, routers, racks housing switches and firewalls and routers. Caching servers are eligible. Licenses that are used to support eligible equipment and installation configuration services of eligible equipment are included, and then also training is included. So if you're implementing a wholly new solution, or if you are bringing in a solution from a new manufacturer and you have no familiarity with that, you can actually get the training paid for through the E-rate program as well, or you can get funding support for that training. And then also, as I mentioned before, basic maintenance of internal connections is a bit of a term of art. Really what is intended to reflect is time and materials network maintenance contracts. Continue the next slide. So the basics of the program, the application cycle is conducted annually, okay? So districts will apply annually for their funding support. Now, you don't have to apply each year for Category 2 funding support if you don't have any Category 2 projects. But the way the process is initiated is through what's called the Form 470. The Form 470 is used to convey to vendors what it is exactly that you need to do. Okay, so you can specify a particular type of make and model of equipment as a preference, but you must accept any alternatives, functionally equivalent alternative solutions, and you have to include them into your evaluation. So your Form 470 will initiate the process, and that triggers a mandatory 28-day competitive bidding period. You must pay attention to that 28-day competitive bid period. During that 28-day competitive bid period, you are not to speak to any vendors. You are not to take product demos. Once you file that 470, or once you post that Form 470, you go dark for 28 days, okay? Contracts signed within that 28-day window or awards made within that 28-day window are automatically ineligible for E-rate support. You will automatically lose money. If you have time, you can post another 470 to initiate the process again. But if you don't, because the timeline for E-rate is set each year and there's only a specific window of time during which to apply, you may find yourself out of luck in any given year if you don't pay attention closely to that 28-day competitive bid period, okay? The next step after the Form 470 and after you've issued your award is to file your Form 471. The Form 471 essentially is the vehicle used to communicate your funding commitment requests to USAC. So you say, I'm buying 100 switches, I'm buying 100 access points, I'm getting installation and configuration services for both. This is the vendor that we're using. These are the costs. Please issue a funding commitment to me based on these details. After that, once you receive your funding commitment decision letter, you'll file what's called the Form 486. That just conveys to USAC that you have started the process. And then Form 472 is where you actually request your reimbursement after you've paid for service. There is an alternative invoicing method called the service provider invoicing method. And the difference between the two, bare is where the applicant pays 100% of the cost and then files a request for reimbursement. You will be reimbursed based on your discount rate. And your discount rate is determined by your district's, I don't want to say poverty rates because it really is pursuant to your free and reduced lunch numbers, but there are some school districts that participate in the CEP program. So then free and reduced lunch does not necessarily dictate, but you can reach, if you have questions about your discount rate, I can absolutely answer those questions. I'm just not going to take up too much time here to do that. And then the service provider invoicing method is where the service provider will go directly to USAC to request the money. And all you have to do as the applicant is pay your non-discounted portion. So if you're a 60% discount district, you would pay 40% of the cost, and the vendor would go to USAC to get the balance of the cost of the project. So last year in funding year 21-22, which was in relation to fiscal year 21-22, they refreshed budgets. In 2015, they implemented the second modernization order. The second modernization order brought in these sweeping changes, implementing Category 2 budgets. Previously, they were school specific. They made changes to those rules for this fiscal year, for funding year 21-22. So now, subject to fixed 5-year budget cycles, okay? The per pupil multiplier is fixed for each 5-year budget cycle. So for the 5-year budget cycle, we're in year 2 now, it's fixed at $167 per pupil, okay? As I mentioned before, you have district-wide budgets, which makes the administration of your Category 2 budget over this 5-year period much easier, as opposed to having to keep your eye on school-specific budgets. The budget floor previously was $9,800. They've increased that to $25,000 in recognition of the fact that you really can't get anything done for $9,800 in a school building. And then also they eliminated the equipment transfer rules. So when there were school-specific budgets, they had to make sure that you were putting the equipment that you were buying with E-rate funding support into the buildings in which you identified the equipment to be going. Now, without school-specific budgets, you don't have to worry about that. You can transfer your equipment from building to building to building without having to notify USAC. So some other notable changes, your enrollment figures may remain static for the 5-year cycle. So if in year 1, you have a specific Category 2 budget, and over the next 4 years, your enrollment continues to decline, you may use that budget figure, that maximum budget figure from year 1 for the entire 5-year period, okay? In years where your enrollment increases, you can update your enrollment in the system, and then your Category 2 budget will increase, okay? You will only be asked to validate your enrollment in the first year and in subsequent years when you request to increase your enrollment. So they only care about your enrollment in year 1, or if you're trying to increase your enrollment and your Category 2 budget, they're going to want you to prove that out as well, okay? Now, you will still be required to provide free and reduced figures each year. However, COVID has added a bit of a wrinkle to that, right? So what USAC and the FCC are allowing applicants to do is you have to use your current enrollment, but you can use your free and reduced lunch figures from fiscal year 1920 or fiscal year 2021, okay? So they're allowing you to use old data, old numbers for the purpose of determining your discount rate, okay? So these are just some examples of other changes and how they have how they're allowing applicants to calculate their Category 2 budgets. Okay, so for large school districts that have 11 or more schools, you can calculate by the total number of pupils. If you have 10,000 students, you multiply that times $167, and there's your number. Your other option is probably never going to be used because it's somewhat impractical, but you can calculate by the total number of schools. So for example, if you have 80 schools in your district, you can multiply 80 schools times the funding minimum per building, which is $25,000, and that will give you a $2 million budget, right? But if you have 80 schools in your district, you probably have not 10,000 pupils, as in the example that we use, but 50,000 pupils or 60,000 pupils. And in that case, your Category 2 budget would be much higher based on the per pupil multiplier as opposed to multiplying the number of schools times the minimum of 25,000. So that's just something else to consider. If you have 11 or more schools, you have two options to calculate your category 2 budget. One, I think, is probably going to be significantly more prevalent than the other. And then equipment tracking, like I said before, beginning July 1st of this year, you can move equipment from one building to the next. The only thing that you're required to do is just track serial numbers. So if in your asset inventory, you have, equipment A, B, and C for building 1, you just basically would say, update your asset inventory to reflect that those serial numbers are being transitioned to building B, for example. And that's just for record keeping purposes, okay, in the event of an audit or something like that. So some of the more obvious advantages to using E-rate are that you can use it to buy new equipment rather than maintain old equipment, right? When they first swept in the category 2 rules, the new rules, there was a lot of school districts that were simply just, purchasing SmartNet year to year to year to year because it was cheaper than actually going out and buying equipment because category 2 funding support was not available to most school districts. But now you have the luxury of actually buying new equipment as opposed to just simply putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, so to speak. It also allows you to devise and implement a lean, scalable IT infrastructure, right? It helps you to distinguish your needs from your wish list, your needs from your wants. And that helps you to determine how do we spend our money most wisely. Okay, what's eligible, what's not eligible, what can we get a discount on, an E-rate discount on, what do we have to pay for out of pocket, or what other grant programs may be there. So it really helps you to kind of narrow down how you're paying for your network refresh year after year after year. And then obviously the most important thing is that the E-rate program allows you to spend less money on IT and more money on pupil instruction, school programs, those types of things. And that's really the key. And then lastly, I think one of the things that that is very important about choosing an E-rate consultant is that they are subject matter experts. There are some E-rate consultants who are just simply data processing companies. They'll send you an Excel sheet at the beginning of the process and they'll say, fill this out, send it back to us, and we'll take the data you provide to us and we'll file a form. They do not necessarily attend USAC's SLD board meetings. They do not necessarily participate in these notice of proposed rulemaking comment periods. They don't really keep their finger on the pulse of the developments in the program and what's happening. So, I think it's important if you're choosing a consultant, or if you have a consultant with whom you're not particularly pleased, when you're looking for a new consultant, I think it's important to find somebody who really does do more than just simply data entry. And that will allow you and your team to focus more on your core functions and responsibilities. You're not spending your time filling out E-rate spreadsheets. You're actually focusing on more specific job responsibilities. But then also, like I said, there's a lot of orders, precedential orders issued by the FCC. There are updates on timeframes and deadlines. There are, like I said, notice of proposed rulemaking where they want comments for future proposed changes to the program. So those are all things that you should be kept aware of because they could impact you in the future. Also, having a consultant ensures that all your documentation is submitted timely because consultants pay attention to these deadlines very, very closely, religiously. And then really, again, someone to advocate on your behalf to the FCC and to USAC, right? Because with cybersecurity, yes, your firewall is eligible for E-rate support, but something that curiously is not eligible for E-rate support is almost all the software that is run on your firewall. Content filtering, malware, threat detection, none of that is eligible for E-rate support. And there are ongoing conversations by E-rate stakeholders, consulting firms, other groups who are trying to get the FCC and USAC to recognize that without these softwares, the firewall is close to a paperweight, and it really needs. They really need to recognize the inherent value to those softwares, and I think practically we can all agree that they should be eligible for E-rate support. It's just a matter of conveying that message. And then obviously, like I said at the beginning, it's important that you choose the right consultant. There's a lot of them out there. Some of them are great. Some of them are terrible. It's no different from a mechanic or a lawyer. There's some that really do take their job very seriously and really are very service and client oriented. And there's others who just simply do it as a job. And it's really just about getting the work done, not necessarily about the quality of the work. So my recommendation would be, if you don't have a consultant or if you are looking for a consultant, would be to maybe talk to a couple and, see who you develop a really good rapport with, see who gives the right answers to your questions, and make your decision based on that. Because accepting somebody, checking somebody's website out and just looking if they have a pretty website, that's just not good enough, right? They will make promises on their website, but that doesn't mean they're going to fulfill those promises. So yeah, that's basically all I have. And at the end of the day, I think, again, I know I talk fast and I know I had to move fast, but I am available for anybody who has any questions. So if you already have a consultant, but you can't get an answer to a particular question or whatever the case may be, I'm still happy to engage, still happy to talk you through whatever issue you have.
So Jeff, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I think you hit a nail on the head. If I go back to what I originally said, and again, having sat in the seat of, someone who had to utilize not only E-rate, but grants as well, you really want to surround yourself with the right team. And that's why we have chosen Jeff, E-rate Consultants, as well as Vince and Cisco. Again, their roles and responsibilities are to make sure that you're getting what you need and what you want, and really representing you. So I appreciate all the information. I know we've gone over a little bit, but again, my goal was to help you understand that there are some amazing folks out there that have some great insight. If you'd like to connect, feel free to reach out. You can see my email is right here at jheiner@Aspire Transforms, as well as education at Aspire Transforms. We are happy to connect you to the resources, the experts, and put you in a position to really advance your organization, your organization's technology. So again, thank you to Jeff. Thank you to Vince. I appreciate everything you've done and everything you do for us. And I look forward to working with you in the future. And folks, thank you for joining. And I look forward to speaking with all of you in the future. Good luck. And hopefully you're not shoveling too much snow in the near future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.